Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Florence from the Institute of Banking and Finance, and we are delighted that you're able to join us this afternoon for our masterclass jointly organized with StarCompliance, where we'll take a deeper look at COVID-19's impact on compliance and risk management. We are delighted today to have Tim Ward, Director of Product Strategy and Marketing from StarCompliance, with us to share survey findings of the pandemic's impact on global compliance, which StarCompliance undertook. He will also touch on some of the biggest challenges faced by compliance teams in and around the world, and in terms of operational and internal risks due to the pandemic and how companies are leveraging technology to address these risks. He will then be joined by an industry panel of practitioners and leaders as they discuss the key challenges companies face during this period and how they adapted their business processes to deal with the risk and challenges faced. Before I invite Tim to begin his presentation, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the IBF, allow me to do a very brief intro on the IBF and its services and the resources we have to help professionals in the financial industry. The IBF was established by the MAS in 1974 as a training provider to provide functional training for the financial industry. Since then, our role has evolved into one of standard setting for financial services sector skills and competencies. Since August 2018, we also expanded our mandate to cover career advisory and job matching functions for the financial services sector. So we now adopt an integrated approach to skills development and jobs for the financial services sector. Here's a quick look at our services and how we support the industry across training, recruitment, and workforce transformation. You can find out more about these services and connect with us on any of these areas from our website. We have also put in place enhanced training support for the financial industry to further alleviate training costs during this period. The enhanced course fee subsidies are part of MAS's support package that was announced in April this year to sustain and strengthen capabilities in the Singapore financial services and fintech sectors amid the current economic downturn. The aim of the enhanced training support is to encourage more companies to send their employees for training and upskilling so that they are in a better position to help the company move forward when economic activity normalizes. Funding support for training has been raised to 95% across the board for all FTS and IBF STS programs, subject to prevailing grant caps. The increased quantum will remain in place until 30th June 2021, before being reduced to 90% and then back down to pre-crisis levels in 2022. You can find out more details on the enhanced training support from our website. Apart from the increase in course fee subsidies, training allowance of $10 per hour for self-sponsored trainees and $15 per hour for company-sponsored trainees will also be given in training undertaken this year. You can find a list of eligible training programs on the IBF Program Finder on our website. In addition, the IBF will also be supplementing the commercial training available with free webinars during this period like this one to support the training needs of the industry. Financial professionals can also tap on the Learn at IBF mobile learning app for bite-sized learning at your own leisure. All these complimentary training are coded with CPD hours. And with that, I conclude my short intro. I'll now hand the time over to Tim.
Great, thanks a lot again, Florence. That sounds like a great training initiative there. So my name's Tim Ward. I've spent 15 years in developing and advocating compliance technology, which we now refer as RegTech. I'm the Director of Product Strategy and Marketing at StarCompliance. I'm based over in the UK, but I've also lived and worked in Singapore and Australia, so I'm somewhat familiar with the Asia Pacific region, and it's great to be here today, and welcome and thanks for joining. So I'd just like to start off just giving you a little bit of an introduction about StarCompliance. StarCompliance is a compliance technology firm. We were founded in 1999 and we're duly headquartered in the US and in the UK. We have over 175 clients and they use the software in over 83 different countries. And we're all really about making compliance simple and easy, both for the compliance teams, but also for the employees themselves and anybody who has a supervisory position. Compliance and regulations can become complex. And so we'd like to deliver software and technology solutions that makes that easier, more efficient, and just helps people on a day-to-day basis perform the roles that they need to perform within financial services. We have a range of clients covering all of the different areas of the financial services industry, and that includes banks, insurance companies, stock exchanges and service providers, private equity firms, asset managers, and more. Firms of all different shapes and sizes and locations use STAR. I think our largest deployment has over 60,000 employees, and our smallest deployment has only 2 employees. So there's a lot of variation in terms of who uses our current products. And those products really fall into 2 categories. The first is monitoring employee conflicts of interest. And that includes monitoring personal trading activities, gifts and entertainment, outside activity, which is directorships, charitable contributions, anything that an employee may engage with that isn't their primary role at their primary employee, we would consider to be outside activity. Making political donations, recording private investments, such as investing in a crowdfunding campaign or a family business, managing lists of insiders and detecting possible insider trading. And then across all of those areas of employee conflict of interest, the system really does 4 things. There's a pre-clearance function that allows employees to request permission for something that they've not yet done. A surveillance function that takes data from lots of different sources, analyzes it against a pre-configured set of rules to determine if there's anything that requires further investigation from the compliance team. There's the automation of certifications and attestations, where employees on joining the firm may be required to review policies or enter particular initial data or to certify various data and activity. And then there's a reporting and MI function that links it all together and provides compliance teams with a really good view of current activity, possible trends, areas of potential risk, etc. The second product is called Compliance Control Room. That addresses potential compliance issues surrounding large financial transactions and projects and situations where there may be material and non-public information being accumulated and distributed within the firm. The common examples of that are mergers and acquisitions, preparing for an initial public offering, perhaps a large loan offering. And that product looks at areas such as deal management, being able to essentially record all of those situations and projects and deals, running conflict searches across that information and also against other company sources, such as the employee conflicts of interest system, CRM systems, procurement systems, etc. Managing a watch and restricted list, again, managing lists of insiders as to who might be on a particular deal at a particular point in time, approving and reviewing wall crossing requests where you may have employees moving from the public side to the private side and hence accumulating material and non-public information potentially, a range of audit functions, and again, a set of reporting tools to bring all of that together and increase transparency and visibility, both for the compliance team and for the supervisory team. So that's StarCompliance and the products that we offer. But moving on to the topic today, we really wanted to take a look at STAR of how the current pandemic this year has affected compliance and risk management. So we designed and distributed a survey, and I'd like just to walk through some of the findings that we had from the survey, but also some of our experiences of working with a range of firms around the world today in terms of what we've observed as to the effect and perhaps the legacy of the pandemic within the compliance and risk industry. So we took the survey, we distributed it, we had 160 detailed responses, and those responses came from firms of varying sizes, from less than 200 employees to some of the largest firms with 10,000 employees operating across more than 50 countries. All different types of firms as well, ranging from asset managers, private equity firms, broker-dealers, investment banks, and then large diversified financial institutions that might have all of those different divisions stock exchanges, including crypto exchanges, insurance companies with asset management divisions, and then again across all of the major financial capitals and areas of the world. So good cross section, I think, of respondents. So the first thing that really emerged from the survey was we explored what was the biggest challenge that compliance teams faced as employees moved to either a fully remote way of working or some sort of hybrid way of working. And we all also observed in answering this question that many different firms operating in different countries had different levels of restriction, obviously, at different times. And so particularly large firms that had employees in multiple locations were also had the complexity of managing different styles of working as well. But by far and the biggest response here was that 43% of firms said that their biggest challenge was handling an increased number of employee requests. And this was particularly true, obviously, with some of those larger firms with 1,000 employees upwards, but all firms reported this as being a difficulty. So what were those increased employee queries? Well, there were certainly lots of queries relating to just general policy, employees thrown into a different way of working, potentially having to adapt their day-to-day business processes, resulted in them having to go back to the compliance documentation and policies to understand how those new ways of working kind of may be affected and whether they were compliant. There were a number of requests for exceptions. We saw many firms experience an increased volume of trading, both within the firm trades and within employee trade, particularly at the beginning of the year, as individuals and firms look to rebalance their portfolios and perform their own risk management and perhaps move out of equities into other areas. So lots of requests for exceptions and queries generally about personally trading. Employees looking for general advice and guidance. I think many employees look to the compliance and legal teams to get that kind of advice and guidance, and questions around information security, handling sensitive, confidential and material and non-public information within that working from home environment. And of course, one of the big challenges is onboarding new employees, new compliance team members, but also new employees within business units. Some of those processes still very manual, some of them perhaps requiring wet signatures, and so it's just the practicality of getting things signed and returned and physically exchanged, resulted in a lot of those queries. So the next biggest challenge that we saw within the survey responses was compliance teams keeping in touch with each other. Many compliance teams are often physically located within the same room, and particularly the ones in the same region, and they're used to very kind of active dialogue during the day, getting lots of advice from each other about potential grey areas or interpretation of regulation or how to handle a particular situation or project. And so once everybody became a little bit more dispersed, that natural ad hoc communication was harder to do. But compliance teams, as always, have adapted to the situation very quickly, and we've seen obviously increased and innovative use of team collaboration tools. We're all now used to using Teams and Skype and chat and Zoom and WebEx, very, very naturally. But also, more innovative use of tools like Miro and virtual whiteboards and other kind of online learning and quiz programs. So everybody, including compliance, have really embraced these new tools and new ways of working. Obviously, in a lot of cases, in-person training has been substituted for remote training and onboarding. We've seen firms use systems such as STAR to deliver ad hoc communications and reminders, and develop special certifications and attestations just to keep connected with employees to communicate any particular issues or concerns and be proactive in that communication. Many compliance teams have instigated a daily or multiple times a day, just compliance team check-ins, having a scheduled amount of time that allows people to ask for those ad hoc questions and just see how each other are getting along, and sort of just keeping in touch with, with colleagues. We've also seen that individual kind of employee outreach. Everybody is in a different situation, different circumstances. Some are in large houses with lots of family members around them. Some are obviously working alone and potentially become isolated. So the compliance team that we see are also taking their part in keeping touch with each other, but also reaching out to individuals on a regular and proactive basis. One positive that's come out of the process is many compliance teams have reported that they actually get an increased amount of time on the focus and concentration activities. And so they've been able to apply that time to reviewing and increase and creating new policies, to optimizing their compliance program, to looking at how the program's working and planning for the future. So the substitute of more time from commutes and things into that increased concentration time has been a potential positive. And then I think as the restrictions have continued throughout the year, many firms and compliance teams in particular have been conscious around social events and well-being activities to make sure, again, that employees' kind of mental health is being sort of observed, and obviously we can help out where necessary. So this question and this slide reports on what we've seen within the firms that we surveyed regarding increased trading activity. Monitoring personal trading activity is a key function for the compliance team. And some firms have reported up to 3 to 4 times an increase in trading activity and trading requests, with some firms reporting up to 7 times more activity based on the same period last year. And this has definitely ebbed and flowed throughout the year, but that type of multiple increase clearly puts a significant load on the compliance teams. So let's take a look at to see how those compliance teams have adopted to that increased traffic. Well, the first thing that was fairly universal is that firms have been very unlikely to make exceptions or provisions from their policy or to relax their policies in some ways. In some ways, it's felt even more important than ever to kind of maintain those policies to protect the employee, but also to protect the firm and the firm's clients in this heightened period of potential risk and potential trading activity. So even though we've seen compliance teams explain policies and be helpful and available and answer queries, we haven't really seen examples where policies have been downgraded or relaxed. We have seen, though, increased communication with employees, and in particular, if there's firms that are experiencing high volumes of compliance queries, high amount of compliance requests, just being transparent and visible about that so that employees have their expectations managed in terms of how long it might take to get some of those requests approved or to handle particular queries. And again, it's about building that partnership with your employees. We've mentioned ad hoc communication campaigns around trading, and in some cases it's really highlighted the ability or the requirement to accelerate adoption of technology. Firms that have some of these things automated or have electronic broker feeds in place versus having manual approvals or easier electronic e-learning programs or solutions around employee onboarding have been able to probably cope with that demand more readily than manual processes and paper-based processes. And that's illustrated really in this question. We asked how effective firms thought their compliance processes were for their largely remote or hybrid workforce. And perhaps unsurprisingly, firms that had a more mature compliance technology program, centralized compliance systems, more automation, reported that they felt that their compliance programs were more effective than firms that purely relied on manual processes. And I think what's interesting about this statistic was that we were starting to also see this in the smaller single location firms that historically, with a local compliance team and a local set of employees within the same office, were able to function perfectly adequately without kind of too many systems in place, just because of the accessibility and the availability of that local compliance team. But during this process, when everybody's become dispersed, that just gets harder to manage. And so there's even the case really to adopt technology at some of those smaller firms. So certainly, if we take a look at how technology can help, well, firstly, it acts as a centralized communication hub. There's a single place that everybody knows where to go to get information, to get the latest version of the policy, to complete all of their required regular compliance tasks, and also their ad hoc compliance tasks and approvals and requests. And that binds together all of the employees, the supervisors, and the compliance teams themselves. The next part is that records are obviously stored electronically. They're available from anywhere, and it's location independent. You don't need to be physically in the office to retrieve historical records or to be able to collect wet signatures or etc. It also increases the availability, the redundancy, and the security of those electronic records. We can use that system to send out ad hoc communications and campaigns, and we can review and share tasks across disparate teams. It's easier to implement multi-level workflows, to collect individual approvals, to reallocate work depending on availability and resource. And of course, employees can access those systems from virtually anywhere. And it's interesting, not only have employees worked from home, but they've taken the opportunity potentially to work from other locations that might not be the home environment. So being able to access those systems from anywhere is kind of a really important advantage of utilizing technology. So the next question we asked was around, has the current situation delayed or slowed down any particular projects or investments that were planned prior to the beginning of the year and the current situation really emerging? And what's quite interesting here, this was polled around about July this year, so right within the middle of the year, but most firms have gone ahead with their projects. I think we did see at the beginning some slowdown in compliance projects, mainly because obviously compliance teams were prioritizing and getting all of their remote workforce up and running, getting all of the technology infrastructure in place, making sure that business continuity and pandemic plans were up to date and agreed and understood and communicated across the organization. But once that was done, we did see compliance projects move ahead, and in some cases they were accelerated because of that recognition that if the current situation did continue, that firms would generally be in a better state if they had access to more tools and more technology. So just some implementation tips if you are in the middle of a implementation project, or you're considering starting an implementation project. These are some of the things that we found to be effective in the projects that we've done. This year, STAR's completed over 30 technology implementations, and they've all been done 100% remotely. And we found that these things have been useful. So definitely building in a communication strategy into the plan. How are the project team members going to be updated? How regularly does that happen? How is it going to happen? What tools are you going to use? I think the next thing is being sensitive about meeting time and planning to make meetings as productive as possible. I think we are all embraced the collaboration technology, but that does mean that people are on a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of WebEx calls, and there's a lot of collaboration calls out of necessity. And so I think we found that making sure that they're as productive as possible, that people are prepared, that there's an agenda, that people know what information will be required and what decisions need to be made in those calls, so they can be as succinct and as efficient as possible, particularly when they're running across different regions and different time zones as well. StarCompliance this year, or over the last 2 years, has really adopted an agile methodology internally to deliver our projects. And we've also seen firms benefit from adopting an agile approach within their change and improvement programs, including their implementation programs. And what that means in terms of implementation is perhaps rolling out solutions incrementally, testing regularly, taking an iterative approach to gathering requirements and performing the configuration and the implementation itself, so you can get value earlier and you can get feedback within the configuration and the build process on a regular basis, instead of running a 3-month or a 6-month or a 9-month project, not getting those solutions in front of the end users, and then potentially having surprises at the end of the project. Obviously, maximizing the use of communication and collaborative tools, not just the mainstream tools such as Teams and Zoom, but also virtual whiteboarding, document collaboration tools, anything that helps you convey kind of important information to each other and reduce the chance of misunderstandings. And that also goes to kind of recording sessions and making sure that you're providing the information in the way that individuals would prefer to consume it. Some of those tasks as part of an implementation can require physical travel. The majority of things can be performed remotely, but there is often physical installation of hardware or network or security settings that perhaps must be done in person. And so those tasks obviously need to be identified and scheduled really at the beginning of the project to allow for kind of contingency in case there's any difficulties in physically moving people or equipment around. And then the last point there is, don't be discouraged about taking projects on. They can be done. A huge amount of the tasks can be performed kind of fully remotely, and it's going to be more important than ever to get the benefit of some of those change and optimization projects. And so, my advice would definitely be don't be discouraged. Get started, keep the collaboration up, and in some ways, getting together to perform an implementation project or an improvement project can really also help bind everybody together and give people a reason to communicate regularly and give people a fixed goal that can help definitely throughout this period. So finally, just take a quick look at what we think perhaps the future legacy of this year will be. Will there be permanent changes to the way that we operate in the years ahead? Well, we believe that regulators will certainly review this period very closely. They'll be looking at firms to see how they operated through this period, how they kept communicating with employees, how they treated kind of clients. Obviously, unfortunately, a number of firms and individuals could experience financial hardship over the next months and years as the ongoing effects of the period really take hold. So obviously regulators will be extremely interested in how firms have helped clients in those situations, how they communicated with employees, the strength and availability of their and robustness of their compliance program. So it's a form of really a form of kind of stress testing in this period. I think the whole remote way of working and training is here to stay. Many firms have seen the benefit of offering a hybrid and remote kind of working approach. Many firms, I know many firms in London, for example, have communicated to their employees that they, for many employees, they'd be happy for them to continue to work from home in the future, or develop some sort of hybrid approach. I think compliance teams can become more resilient when they embrace technology in all of its forms. And I think compliance teams are also thinking about how they can become faster and more efficient when answering questions and providing advice. We've seen lots of projects through the implementation of artificial intelligence and chatbots to help answer some of the more frequently asked questions, leaving compliance teams free to ask some of those harder, more difficult questions. I think firms have been considering the optimum structure for the compliance teams. Is that better as a regional team? Is it better distributed throughout the organization? Should work be passed from one region to another to be able to take advantage of global time zones? So some firms have looked at the way that their teams are kind of structured. And then finally, I think the idea of compliance engaging with their employees is so important in terms of keeping employees informed of important developments, highlighting particular risk areas. And sometimes it's hard to get those messages through. And so I think if compliance teams can embrace strategies that are commonly used in marketing in terms of how to create those messages, creating them in the right format at the right frequency, delivering relevant content to the right people, I think marketeers are experienced in that that science of engagement, and they can use, compliance teams could benefit from learning a lot of those strategies and incorporating them into their own programs. So I'll probably just finish here. We've got a full ebook that's available that we can distribute following the session that really describes all of those areas, and you can view and see those survey results in much more detail. So before I move on to the panel discussion, I'll just check with Florence if we've had any questions through that we can pause and answer those questions.
Thank you, Tim. We don't have any open questions at the moment, so I would like to encourage the audience to post your questions in the Q&A window if you have any for Tim at this point in time.
Great, and if there is additional questions as we go through and we start the panel discussion, we can obviously pause, and we're happy to answer kind of any questions about the pandemic, or if there's any other topics as we talk through here. Feel free to post kind of any related questions, and we can watch out for those, and we can pause them, pause and answer them.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think we can start the panel discussion now, perhaps.
Great. Okay, well, I'm delighted to be joined today by Matt Sherman, who's a compliance consultant for Sherman Consultancy, Oliver Stern, who's the head of legal within the Asia region for the Man Group, Ivango, who's the head of legal and compliance within the Asia Pacific region for GAM Investments. Welcome, gents. Good morning, good afternoon, and perhaps good evening. How's everybody doing?
Morning.
Well, thanks.
Good. So perhaps I could just quickly ask you each just to introduce yourselves in terms of your role in the firm, and perhaps how long you've been in the kind of compliance and risk management industry. Matt, could you kick us off, please?
Yes, thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Sherman. I'm a compliance consultant with frighteningly now 21 years experience in compliance and risk management, predominantly asset management, but also covering a variety of other aspects of the financial services industry. 10 of those, the last 10 of those years has been as a consultant, independent consultant, working for a number of blue chip organizations on predominantly compliance projects with more of a focus on the project side, particularly conflict of interest side. And that has brought me naturally into working with STAR on a number of occasions now. We have a number of mutual clients whose names I saw on that initial dashboard. So I've helped those implement StarCompliance previously. I'm actually currently working with STAR to manage a very large global implementation at the moment. So I think my background is predominantly asset management, but it's more with a compliance focus on conflicts of interest of late.
Great, thanks a lot, Matt. And Oliver, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Stern. I'm the General Counsel and Head of Compliance for Man Group in Asia Pacific. Man is a global listed asset manager with approximately $113 billion in AUM across a range of different fund strategies.
I think we've just lost Oliver there. So Ivan,
currently no office.
oh, you're back, Oliver. Yeah, you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah, no, we can hear you now.
So we have offices in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Sydney, and Tokyo. Singapore is a core strategic hub for us as well, with a number of products registered there. And I spent a lot of time working on Singapore law and regulations, so very happy to be speaking with you today.
Great, thanks for joining us, Oliver. Ivan, would you like to finish us off here with an introduction?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation, by the way. My name is Ivan Goh. I handle all legal and compliance matters for GAM Investments in Asia. We have offices in Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, and we're looking at opening another one at the moment. The GAM Investments is approximately 800 people firm, also listed, based in Europe, with portfolio management and sales functions out in Asia. I've spent approximately 16 years doing legal and compliance work, originally starting out as a lawyer in London, then working in fund of hedge funds, moving out to Hong Kong 7 years ago, and doing what I'm doing now, general counsel essentially for legal and compliance matters.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Ivan. And could you kind of start us off? Can I take us all back, probably if we can remember, to the beginning of this year when this situation was really kind of starting to develop, and we realized that it was going to change, certainly at the time, our short-term way of working. I don't know if anybody could have really anticipated that we'd still be kind of in the middle of things, at the end of the year, but certainly at the beginning of the year. Can you recall when you first started to get a feeling that things were going to change and work processes were going to be adapted, and what were the type of conversations that were taking place in those first few weeks within the compliance teams?
So as initially, we took the view, and I have to say I moved to GAM Investments back in April this year, but initially we took the view that in Asia at least, we would pretty much follow government guidance, and government guidance wasn't mandatory, but essentially if the government closed down its offices and sought for their staff to work from home, then we would do the same. But we've always taken a kind of voluntary or flexible viewpoint on things, just depending on people's own personal arrangements. As the situation became more serious, then we encouraged people to work from home, and definitely as it reached Europe in March, the whole firm took a very conservative stance on employee safety and instituted remote working for everyone.
Yeah, and did you find that the compliance teams just needed to follow the firm guidance, and the firm was obviously following the government kind of patterns, and so the pathway was fairly clear, or was there a lot of discussion around what would be recommended versus what was advised, or how easy was it to kind of navigate through that and communicate that with both the compliance team themselves, but also kind of the wider employees? I
think it's somewhat it's an open question, actually. I mean, it's given that there's no mandatory guidance or there's nothing mandatory in Hong Kong, at least where I'm based. Firms have been open to choose their own arrangements and what suits them. So I'm aware that there are firms which have been in the office the entire time, and there have been firms which have been working from home the entire time. I think from our perspective, a lot of it's down to employee safety, but also employer liability, because and business continuity overall. If there is an infection in the office, then everybody's going to have to work from home. That's not going to be good for anyone. And if somebody does get ill, and you could be accused of exposing other employees to that through not taking adequate precautions, that's not going to be good for business. So I think for many reasons, the conservative thing for us has worked out well. But that said, obviously I'm in the office right now. There has been a flare up in Hong Kong. We're trying to be flexible. For example, the head of Asia next door to me, he's just moved house. He has no internet yet, so he has to be in the office.
Yeah. And perhaps with that non-mandatory approach, have you found that generally there's just a balance of people who either prefer or are comfortable in the office versus being remote anyway? So there's not been a case where you've had to, it's kind of that balance been naturally found rather than sort of being overly organized, if you see what I mean, or mandated.
Definitely in Asia, in Hong Kong and Japan especially, we have people working in small households, or crowded households, and the general feeling has been it's difficult. It has been difficult to work from home at times because they've been working off the dining table. And even though GAM offers chairs and monitors and whatnot, and indeed we've issued all of our employees with new laptops to speed things up. It's not easy, and some people don't even want those things because they just don't have space for it. So I think depending on people's own situation, they want different things. For some people with small kids, they've enjoyed having the time to stay at home. Others, I know, want to get out as soon as possible and come back to the office. So I think it just really depends, and we've tried to be accommodating in that regard.
And it's funny, isn't it, how different roles are going to be impacted differently. Many roles, who are desk-based anyway, they've been able to pick up their desk and and then just move location, whereas roles that have had like heavy travel or lots of client engagements, really their days are looking very different to how they were.
Our sales guys are chomping at the bit to get out there and do some work. Some of our analysts as well, to visit companies and whatnot. That's obviously been impossible. At times, clients in country are happy to meet, but traveling abroad, and that's a large part of our business, given we operate across Asia. That's just been very difficult. And so, we can talk about this a bit more later, but we've been focusing a lot on online events. And we have seen some success with that.
Yeah. Okay. We'll definitely come back to that point. Oliver, can I ask you? We saw in the survey, compliance teams getting an increased number of inbound kind of queries or policy exceptions or kind of questions. Did you experience that at all, or did you find that employees kind of transitioned fairly easily?
So we did receive additional questions for sure, but in general, I would say it was also a very smooth transition. As a firm, we've always tried to embrace technology early, and so when the pandemic kicked off, we were well placed to handle working remotely. I'm sure, as with every other firm in the financial service sector, business continuity planning includes regular testing, working from home. Clearly, working from home for a day or two at a time is different from working at home for an extended period, but our staff were broadly familiar with the concepts, and we had the technology and the tools to move smoothly into working from home process. We did see an increase in personal trading, as you mentioned in your survey, but we have the technology to deal with that. During the year, there have been, for example, new staff onboarding. We've had to look at the way that we do training, that we do induction. I've had to give a lot of thought, particularly to the regulated activities within our business across the region. So that would include the sales and marketing, the portfolio management, the research analysis functions, giving thought to how those activities are monitored on a remote basis, increasing the amount of training, the monitoring, the supervision we do. We very recently ran compliance training across the whole region just to remind staff of the policies and the obligations, something that we would do anyway, but we've given it a bit of further focus in this period. But by and large, it has been business as usual. And I would share a lot of what Yvonne has just mentioned in terms of the different circumstances staff face, and certainly from our firm, the importance we place on giving employees the flexibility to do what's right for them. You can probably see I'm working from home at the moment. You may hear my children in a minute. I empathised with the picture on your slide of the employee with a computer in one hand and a baby in the other. That's very much me a lot of the time. And we do have employees who for that reason do feel the need to be in the office a little bit more, but others very much wish to stay at home, and we try to provide that flexibility where we can.
Yes, definitely. I think seeing team members with their children, dogs, cats, kind of taking over the meeting has become kind of a fairly common occurrence. And Matt, can I kind of come to you and sort of, you're obviously about to embark on a number of probably implementation projects and do those in the kind of traditional way at the beginning of the year. Can you speak to just how some of those projects were reorganized and kind of reshifted sort of as a result of the situation, and kind of your experience a little bit as to how that's worked and where some of the challenges were?
Yes, thank you, Tim. It's interesting. A lot of it bears out in the slides you were sharing earlier. But I think a lot of this is that, and as Oliver and Ivan have just touched on as well, is that you lose that human interaction, that the face-to-face work, particularly with projects, is so important. I think, you know, I look back on the last few months, I think actually things have gone extremely well in the new environment with the projects I've been involved in. I'm thinking how those have been adapted is being, you know, in these, you know, bubbles working from our home environments. It's all been use of the technology. So rather than being on site at a client's offices and having, you know, meetings, workshops, the dialogue that you talked about also at the, you know, around the table, people constantly talking, asking, bouncing ideas off each other. You've lost that, and then replaced it effectively with, you know, with your screen and with the various, you know, mechanisms, whilst, you know, Zoom, Teams, all the kind of Skype, all the kind of interactive tools, I think have blossomed in this period. I think that's been the one upside, in the sense it's been, you know, it's brought those to the fore and shown people can, you know, work collaboratively and effectively, you know, remotely, more so than perhaps people thought, particularly on, you know, large projects when you've got a large number of people, often in different parts of the world, engaged. And I think that's one of the challenges. You'd always have that challenge even before the virus, in the sense that you've got a global project and you've got people working out different time zones. You're going to need to have calls. I think the change I've seen, even in those senses, is, you know, the use of the video call has become so much more powerful than just an audio, you know, conference call that we probably traditionally had on projects and assignments, where you'd still talk to everyone, but now you've got the visuals. You do see, and you can perhaps connect in a slightly different way than just verbally. So I think that's really a real positive change. But I do, yeah, personally, I do miss, and I think, you know, the ability to be on site with clients and having that interaction. I think you probably get a little bit more in that sense. So the adaptation to me, and I think looking at it, I think the projects have probably required a little bit more effort and probably a little bit more time than if it'd been sort of on site and you can sort of crunch through some things face to face. But I think the power of adaptation and the use of technology has enhanced that and made it, you know, much more seamless than perhaps I would have thought if you'd presented this argument to me a year ago and, you know, predicted what was going to happen this year.
Yeah, I think it's the process now is quite democratic, isn't it? Particularly for teams that already had maybe they had 60% of the people in the office, but they had project team members in other locations. Some remote working, but maybe minority. I think now everybody's in the same position. It's quite democratic in that everybody's sort of, you're not disadvantaged if you're the person working from home and everyone else is in a meeting room somewhere, because you never quite, in that situation, you never quite know what's been said just before the meeting or just afterwards, or and so it's everybody's kind of got access to the same information, and even sometimes quieter team members can speak up and contribute where they may not have been comfortable doing that. But has there been any parts of the implementation process that you found it particularly difficult, where you thought, if this had been in person, we wouldn't have had this issue, or we would have been able to address it kind of a lot quicker?
I think there are occasions I probably could look to where I think we could have probably done things maybe just a little faster if you'd had the ability to sit in a room and talk things through, or get some, particularly with some of these projects, is you can also then talk to people, a layer or two back beyond the project or the compliance team, or actually into the business, and discuss some of those things, because you've actually got access to them more easily. And sometimes a knock on a door and a conversation over a coffee, you can iron out any kind of kinks in a particular process, more than having to perhaps arrange a more formal call and discussion over the airwaves. So I think there's times I think perhaps some things could have been done a little bit quicker. I don't think we'd have done, nothing I don't think would have ended up with different results, in the sense that, if we'd done it face to face, you'd have got a completely different result. I think, to me, it just makes it a little bit more efficient at times, in that sense. But I think broadly we've still got to the right outcomes, but just, in a slightly, perhaps a little different way.
I think that's right. I mean, I think if there is any kind of more sensitive discussions, or you're trying to gauge reaction from, or even get buy-in from kind of key stakeholders, it feels that's something that is a little tougher, even with video, to sort of get the cues that you would pick up in person. But yeah, definitely, I kind of broadly agree. And have you seen kind of anybody actually change their compliance policies, or adjust them, or do anything different from that perspective? Or generally speaking, is it really, all the policies and the restrictions and things are the same? It's just the sort of the style slightly different.
Yeah, I think that's right. Certainly from what I've seen, I think it's just been more the style and the approach, as opposed to the change in the content of of policies. And we saw Oliver touched on it about, because our personal account dealing rows and mechanisms in place to look at that. So there may be tweaks. Firms may change their appetite slightly, or any restrictions, they've got the flexibility to do that. But I think broadly it's been more around, again, as Oliver and I have touched on, it's more around the changing approach to monitoring. Like I said, you get additional training out and reminders, and it's looking at different ways that you can remind or train staff as well. I mean, training is often done through the computer as well as in person, but it's just making certain that the training is targeted in the right way and is timely to remind staff. Just because they're at home doesn't mean that they shouldn't follow the same policies if they were in the office.
Yeah, I think that training point's really interesting, in that people probably increased requirement to do the training, so kind of offering it in convenient bite-sized chunks, being able to do it from anywhere. I think people have seen their working day kind of being stretched in different directions, so being able to provide kind of that, allowing people to consume training at their convenience on their devices that they would like to do, maybe away from their desk, so that they're kind of getting a break from the usual kind of working environment, could be important. Ivan, have you seen any kind of changes within kind of your compliance policies or program, or have they remained fairly consistent through this period, and it's more just adjusting kind of the communications and the edges around it, if you like?
Compliance policies have remained the same. I mean, whether we're working from home or in the office, we know the regulations are still the same, but that's the only the difference. There are some tweaks, I suppose. The risk of it's more difficult to surveil, particularly the front office employees when they're at home. There's always the risk. I mean, obviously, this is not a primary concern because you have to trust that people will do things in accordance with the law. But it would be easier for employees to perform insider trading, or probably the larger risk is just a lack of confidentiality with people working from home. It could be a flatmate. It could be another family member who could hear things. That could be insider information, particularly as we're a listed company and obviously invest in the public markets. So that's concern. So for that reason, we actually very much encourage our traders, our investment managers to work from their own room. I think that just makes sense for all sorts of reasons. But
do you subscribe to the theory that there is a higher confidentiality risk in this scenario? I think the basis of that theory is that kind of that work-home boundary is a bit more blurred, and it's just people are kind of coming and going from conversations, and it's just a natural human thing to kind of talk about that. Do you kind of buy into that theory?
Yeah, I suppose there have been several cases, particularly in the US, of family members being prosecuted for insider trading in exactly these sorts of circumstances. So that is a real risk, and I think we have to do what we can do as a business to prevent that kind of thing. And of course, we can't stop that happening. But I think given that people are working from home, I think if you don't have a policy which seeks to ensure confidentiality at home, then you're probably unlikely at this point, but there could be a point where the regulator might think that that's inadequate as a policy, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of one of those things where it could potentially be it's inadvertent. It's an employee that has no malicious kind of intent, but inadvertently, as the situation grows, it kind of becomes a bit more natural. And then, as you say, suddenly a family member's in or even if there's multiple links in that kind of chain, ultimately there's an end person who has no idea that effectively they've been tipped off on on the trade. It's totally inadvertent.
They may not work in the finance industry at all. They just might hear something and just, appearances matter as well. They may just have, coincidentally traded on something, but, unless you've got some protections in place, it's difficult to prove otherwise if someone, I think it's just, overall it's safe. As I said, we're trying to encourage it, but of course it depends on people's own living arrangements.
Yeah, it's a good example of something where just basic awareness and sort of quick training and quick reminder and just sort of a few case points always go a long way, don't they? As you say, you mentioned kind of the US cases. That's probably the most effective way to increase that awareness and say, oh, by the way, you might be interested in kind of what happened in this situation. Is definitely a good approach there.
I think one of the other risks is that we've been conscious of is cybersecurity, cleanliness, and making sure that, I don't know if you saw, there was a case in Australia recently where a fund manager went bankrupt, had to shut down business because of fraud initiated through a fake Zoom invitation. Fraudsters managed to gain access to their email, and then they authorized fraudulent payments from the fund account. So, that's a novel sort of crime, which probably has come about because everybody's working from home these days. I think we have periodic training. So our cybersecurity training, we'll do an annual one, but we'll also have just quick reminders every month or so for people to do like a 15-minute piece of training just to make sure that cybersecurity is at the top of everyone's mind. And that's something that we've done anew this year, actually, because of this risk.
I think that's right. I mean, I think there's a whole different set of communications and attack profiles that bad actors are doing in this period that, are probably quite effective. I remember our internal phishing training at the beginning. You kind of went through the training and thought, well, I would never click on this. I would never do that. Whereas when we do this quite regularly internally at Star, and the more recent ones are very effective, and it gets harder and harder to kind of detect what's real versus what's potentially an attack. So I think definitely on the cybersecurity, particularly as people have a whole array of, it's that, again, that mixture of kind of work devices versus home devices, and as you say, working on the kitchen table, etc. It's just, things are just more accessible. So yeah, definitely seen an increase in that kind of training. Oliver, if I can come to you briefly, have you seen kind of any particular changes or any cues from the regulators to say that they're looking into particular areas?
We've certainly seen a lot of interest from our regulators on a global basis in how we are working through the pandemic. And in Hong Kong, for example, the SFC put out a frequently asked questions and circular document at the end of March of this year, in which they set out their expectations for firms. So that included things like notifying the regulator if the business continuity plan was invoked. It also, quite interestingly for us, talked about the scenario where employees of the licensed corporation were out of jurisdiction. This is something that for us has been quite a significant thing to look into. We've had a number of scenarios where staff are not in the country they are employed in. That might be through voluntary decision. They may be from a foreign country and wish to return to family. They may also be blocked for visa or immigration reasons from returning. Bearing in mind in Asia, at least certainly in Hong Kong and China, our employees first started working from home at Chinese New Year, so a number of staff were on holiday at the time, and we did have some staff who were effectively stuck for quite some time due to visa immigration restrictions coming out of COVID. So there's been some regulatory guidance around that, and we've had a lot of interest from regulators in those sorts of topics. But I think more broadly, as a regulated firm, we are keen to keep our own regulators posted on how we are seeing a business in light of COVID. And so, yes, we've found extensive interactions, but more, I think, for information gathering than anything. It's been very clear to us that our regulators, as well as our peer group in the asset management sector, we're all looking at the same thing. In Hong Kong, as mentioned, a lot of businesses have gone to working from home effective today, which ironically is the day that the UK has come out of its lockdown, which sort of does summarise some of the challenges, I think, for global businesses. But the SFC again put out a notice yesterday reminding licensed corporations that they were now working from home, that turnarounds might take a bit longer than usual. And so we very much see this as a working environment that is of equal relevance to our regulators and peer group as it is to ourselves, and we do find it is quite a supportive environment to work through the relevant issues. Yeah,
and do you, that licensing point is quite an interesting one. Is there a requirement, is there a certain number of days when somebody's operating from a different country, or are they just not allowed to operate from that country and still maintain those activities? Is that the issue, that if somebody basically decamps to a different region for X amount of time, they really can't perform those licensed activities in that window?
Well, it very much needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. It depends on the country the individual is employed in, the country the individual is displaced to, what their role is. Is it a regulated function? Are they required to conduct those regulated activities from the place they're currently in? And so. Yeah. It's not a one-size-fits-all question, but I think the overall point is that we saw a lot of flexibility and understanding from the regulations. This isn't just in Hong Kong. This would apply globally, in terms of there being an understanding in the current environment that some staff might, for whatever reason, be out of country for a little bit longer than planned. So I believe it's the US where the tax authorities released some guidance recently, effectively giving some relief for people who had been in the US for longer than might have always been permitted under the relevant tax codes before certain taxes became payable. So I think it's in general, it's an environment where we just have to be very careful, rely on staff to be very honest and transparent about where they are and why that's the case, ensure that they update us through use of our technology, which allows staff to put their place of residence and also their current place of location, and then work with the compliance, tax, and business functions to make sure that any function performed outside of country is indeed permitted by the local regulatory framework.
Yeah, and Yvonne mentioned the sort of sensitivity around confidential information within the home environment. Is there any other issues that kind of keep you up at night, Oliver, that you're particularly anxious about, or kind of looking ahead to kind of keep a closer eye on?
I do agree that the cyber risks are very pertinent in the current environment. Just with less time sort of speaking face to face with our colleagues, there is a greater risk, and I guess the cyber risks are just slightly different inherently by virtue of us working remotely. Like you said, we conduct regular internal training, and I receive the same emails that you mentioned, and they're always challenging to spot. But no, other than that, I don't believe so. I mean, for us, one of the things I was going to mention that's been a practical consideration coming out of some of these information security risks, although it doesn't keep me up at night necessarily, is printing. In Hong Kong and China, which are very document heavy jurisdictions, it is important for some of us to have printer access, which is difficult at home, and we as a firm have prohibited it. And now we have e-signatures, which is a policy change that we have one of the few policy changes we have rolled out as a result of the pandemic. But there was a period where I did have a concern that some staff might feel compelled to forward an email to a personal address in order to print it, despite our request that not happen. And I've been glad to say that hasn't been the case. But it's a practical example of where working from home in parts of Asia has been perhaps more problematic than other jurisdictions where hard copy documents and wet signatures may not be as required these days. But certainly for me, that's been a challenge.
I think that's a good example of hopefully something that might be a long-term change, you know, where in this day and age, hopefully there is legal and compliant alternatives to wet signatures, and is now the time to kind of eradicate them from our processes in a way, because it is just, even in normal operations, it slows processes down. And if there's secure alternatives, then there's so many processes that would be improved and quickened by using kind of the electronic alternative maybe. Have you seen what's your sense within the general kind of employee base, Oliver? Do you see a bit of fatigue and a bit of either in performing the training activities or following instruction, or just general kind of fatigue within the employee base? Or do you think, okay, everyone's kind of adapted, it's sustainable if this situation does kind of continue into next year? Do you feel that your current processes are kind of sustainable?
Well, I think our employees are very realistic, and we've run our own surveys, and those have really shown a very positive response from our employee base in relation to the steps that we've taken as a business. And I think the cards we've all been dealt with relating to the pandemic mean that the business cannot carry on as before, at least for the moment. And really, our focus has been very similar to how Yvonne described it, of keeping our employees safe, doing the best that we can to maintain the business continuity, but importantly respect the differences that apply to each of our staff, and put no pressure on people to return to the office or indeed to work from home, but at the same time try and ensure that our business can continue in the most effective way, which essentially is delivering the best performance possible to our clients. And the feedback from employees has been positive. I think we do talk about WebEx fatigue, for example. That's a phrase that comes up from time to time, being the video conferencing service that we use. And if you have a full day of video calls, it can be demanding. And I certainly have had conversations with colleagues who are very keen to return to work. But I've also had conversations with colleagues who are very grateful for the flexibility that they are afforded in being able to work from home. And as much as Yvonne mentioned the small housing in Hong Kong, living with multiple generations of family, those same points can also direct staff towards staying at home, because if you live with an elderly relative, you might conclude that they are at greater risk of COVID, and therefore you might appreciate the flexibility of staying at home and reducing their infection risk. And so what we've found across our employees in Asia is that it really isn't a one size fits all, and that different people take different approaches, and that provided that we can provide our staff with the flexibility and with the tools and the systems to make whatever choice is best for them, the reaction in the sort of surveys and feedbacks we've sought has been very positive. And the other thing I'd like to mention on that is well-being, which for us has been a really key topic throughout the pandemic, and we've been very careful to try and take relevant steps to ensure that well-being is front and center of what we do. Recognise that these are circumstances which may cause anxiety or concern to certain staff. They may have family members who are sick or at high risk. There may be concerns around, you know, the employment status and viability of the economy, that sort of thing. And so we've adopted a number of innovative tools to consider that. We've released wellbeing apps with a lot of resources and tools on them, ranging from meditation techniques to expert podcasts from people with experience of how to manage stress. We've also rolled out greater technology, in particular Slack, which is our internal office social media, is how I would best describe it as a non-expert. But that allows us to create different channels that staff can subscribe to. So you can subscribe to a families channel, a wellness channel, a volunteering channel. And it allows us to create discussion groups across our different regions that are very tailored to specific interests that our staff has. And so that's been a really key way that we've been able to manage some of those wellbeing considerations across the office.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and again, hopefully something that will be ongoing now, and that sort of increased focus on well-being and keeping in touch and the social aspects, valuing the social aspects of work. You know, hopefully that will, you know, be something that is remembered now, and now is going to be ingrained in just how we do work, as well as that kind of increased flexibility and convenience, and delivering information to employees in the way that it can be easily consumed and is kind of convenient. And yeah, you mentioned your children in the house there, Oliver. I think we're all now learning. I know I certainly am, from our kids, and they've been adopting this technology and using these channels for communicating with each other. And it's ironic, isn't it, that as parents we've kind of switched from berating our children for being on screens to kind of encouraging them, because we know it's such a good connection kind of with their friends. Yvonne, can I kind of come to you as you kind of look to the year ahead? What do you think sort of compliance teams and your firm in general will kind of take away from this year, and how do you kind of view going into next year? Is there specific changes and programs that you were hoping to make anyway that you'll continue with, or what do you think the next 3 to 6 months looks like for you and the firm?
I think we will continue definitely with, maybe not when and if COVID goes away, we will definitely have some kind of flexibility for working from home. We've already implemented agile working for the vast majority of staff. And so I think that, in common with what you hear in the media, I think that will be a reality for us. We've already reorganized offices for social distancing purposes, which means at the present time there isn't enough space for everyone to be in the office. And so I think that will definitely be a reality. In terms of some of this, so like Oliver, we've also engaged Adobe Sign actually as our kind of electronic signature service, and that's been incredibly useful. We've had documents held up otherwise before that for months because people were just not able or willing to get things signed for good reason, for health reasons, and that has delayed things. Luckily, not too much. But I think that'll definitely be something, moving more to an electronic environment with the signatures. We've also actually improved our use of StarCompliance as it happens. I think there's a greater recognition that teams can span the globe, even though that's an obvious point, but it just makes it a lot easier. And so we've centralized some of the usage of StarCompliance, and it will just make many people's lives a lot easier. I think people have been providing, for example, I think in some ways it's good to get hard copy brokerage statements. We've been having people upload them on StarCompliance, for example. in the past, we've had people requesting many documents from me, which strictly speaking, they could have accessed from different systems. Now we're creating more consistency amongst the record keeping, reducing the number of kind of systems we use, and just trying to create more consistency so that we can facilitate kind of the online working environment. And the use of cloud is obviously something that we're continuously moving to as and when a lot of our tech ages, essentially. So a lot of it maybe isn't seen from the outside, but there's a lot of, I would say, internal efficiencies that we all probably seek to create, as well as facilitating people's ability to work from home in the future.
Do you think there's anything unique about the Asia region in terms of sort of any unique challenges or ongoing kind of innovations within the region, or do you feel that it does follow kind of the pattern around other areas of the world?
It's a difficult question.
Sorry to end ending on a tricky question there.
Anything unique about Asia? I'm not too sure. I mean, I think that the concerns are probably, other than what we've already mentioned, particularly Oliver, about the differences in the size of housing, multi-generational households and whatnot. I think the concerns are global, I would say.
Yeah, I think from our conversations earlier, I definitely picked up that, you used to just always having employees in lots of different locations, probably working across different time zones with other sort of branch offices and things of that sort, and basically just it sounds like quite a lot of movement between the different areas, and quite an agile and quite a fast moving environment as well, potentially, but obviously obviously lots of commonalities as well within other regions.
One thing I would say is maybe quite a compliancy point, but in Europe they have a vast passporting regime, and there isn't the same in Asia. So when it comes to marketing of funds, it can be a little bit easier from a compliance standpoint in Europe, whereas in Asia, obviously, it's a jurisdiction by jurisdiction analysis, and that has posed issues for me in terms of facilitating what sales and marketing want to do and stay in compliance with every single local jurisdiction in which we operate in Asia. So that's one peculiar thing for our sales guys and marketing guys, but it's nothing new. I think it will continue, because we have seen, as I said earlier, success with the online events, and so that will be one thing we'll have to deal with from a compliance perspective that we didn't have to deal with as much beforehand. Yeah,
it'd be interesting on the event side, where obviously this year vast majority of firms have just switched to total kind of online events. I think in the UK, I think it's just about been announced that you can resume business events up to a certain number of participants, but whether attendees will have an appetite to attend in-person events will remain to be seen. And it'll be interesting what happens next year, as presumably there'll be some kind of transition back, or some hybrid, or maybe firms will think, well, there's a lot more attendance and it's a lot more convenient, and the remote pattern kind of works, and it'll just be interesting to see how the whole event sort of scenarios pan out, and the compliance. Obviously there's generally a lot fewer compliance issues around online events that there may be with kind of in-person events potentially. So it'll be just interesting to kind of keep an eye on that and see how all of that kind of pans out. Matt, if I can just kind of come to you finally, we just have, I don't think we have any specific questions. If you have any last questions for the panel, then please feel free just to post them before we wrap up here. There's a question obviously about the e-document and the survey results. We will make that link available and distribute that to everybody sort of post event. But Matt, can I just sort of come back to you? Kind of what do you kind of see going into next year? Do you think compliance teams will kind of change how they're operating and how they're managing and doing these projects kind of permanently?
I think the jury's still out a little bit. I think as we touched on earlier, I think there's a natural divide. Some people will want to be back in an office, some people will be happy at home, and firms will probably take a more of a pragmatic decisions. I think there's definitely a land shift change that's taken place there. I think if anything, this has certainly shown me, I think in many ways, that it can work. The client I'm working with at the moment is predominantly on the other side of the world in Australia. We've got a lot of work we're doing with the US, a lot of work in India. So there's all the geographic time zones to be split across. And I look back and think, wow, we can do this project as well as we've done it, but not being on site, and which is as much as I'd like to be, and having that interaction. You think, well, actually anything's possible if you can get through projects in these environments, these conditions across the time zones. It just shows you what is possible in a normal world, so to speak. So I think in my mind it's probably going to be more of a hybrid, but this has shown just what is possible without always being face to face and in different time zones, and how people can be sort of flexible and adapt to deliver, even if it's in perhaps a slightly different way to the normal.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. I think some of the positives about embracing technology and staying more connected, and certainly some of the themes that Oliver mentioned around placing employee well-being and flexibility sort of more centrally in the kind of firm's agenda and priorities, I think are hopefully all big positive changes that will come from this year, and will be carried forward into whatever the future looks like. I think there was an announcement today that one of the vaccines has been approved for rollout within the UK, and I'm sure that will occur within other countries. And so perhaps that's the start of the light at the end of the tunnel. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to really thank Oliver, Yvonne and Matt for participating in that discussion. It has been great to kind of look back over the year and see how it's affected the compliance and risk management areas, particularly within the Asia region there. So just like to thank everybody for their attendance, and I hope you found that useful. Back to you, Florence.
Right, thank you so much, speakers. It was great, gentlemen. Thank you so much for the discussion. I'm sure the audience benefited. And with that, we have come to the end of today's session. Do connect with us via email if you have any questions. We'll send a deck of slides together with a certificate of attendance, as well as the link to download the e-document that Tim mentioned. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish everybody a very good weekend ahead.